Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Live Free Now show, bringing you the news, views, tips, and tools you can use to live a free, prosperous, and healthy life. Today, we have a wonderful program lined up for you. We're going to be chatting with Howard Lichtman about a project he's involved with called the Thick Red Line. And essentially, the aim of the project, from what I gather, is to try to restore some peace and harmony between community members and law enforcement. And if you've been paying attention at all lately, you are well aware that there's a lot of division, discord, violence. Cities are burning down. There's immense mistrust, some rightfully there, some misplaced. And it looks like they're trying to put this fire out by bringing people together. And they got a wonderful tactic to do that. We're going to hear from Howard all about that here shortly. I want to invite you to subscribe to the podcast at livefreenow.show. That's livefreenow.show, where you can find all of the previous podcasts, and you could subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher. Also, please sign up for our email newsletter so we can keep in touch. We are broadcasting live in various different places. And for the podcast listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. All right, without further ado, let's bring him up, the man of the hour, Howard Lichtman. How are you today?
Hey, John, good to be with you and your audience.
Yeah, man. So why don't you start by introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about yourself to some of the audience that may not be familiar with you, and then we'll just get right down to the nuts and bolts of this cool project you're working on.
Sure, I'm a technology executive. I own a small consulting company in the field of visual collaboration, and I'm a longtime liberty lover. I'm a voluntarist, and I also didn't real. I was in California at the beginning of the COVID, and I was doing some activism with our mutual friend David Rodriguez, and we got together with some folks that did not believe the story that the government and the media was telling us about the COVID. And we began going into hospitals very early on in what the LA Times said was the epicenter of COVID in California, and we found empty tents, empty waiting rooms. We talked to the employees doing the testing. They said that they weren't doing very much testing at all, and in fact, they weren't seeing any more increase in death and disease than the usual and customary, seasonal influenzas and COPDs and respiratory issues that drive people to the emergency room or kill them or whatever it is. And we found hospital employees that were openly speculating that the whole thing was a hoax. So we began organizing civil disobedience, and we would reopen parks and we would reopen beaches, and the police would come out and they say, hey, you're not allowed on this beach. This beach is closed. And we'd say, no, you don't own the beach. We'd stand on our natural law rights. And the police officers would say, hey, we're with you, dude. We don't want to be doing this, but like, what are we supposed to do? And you could tell they didn't want to be enforcing these lockdowns. And so when we stood firm on our natural law rights and just began having a conversation with them, we realized that, what could they do? And I had a little bit of an epiphany, and the epiphany was that they all needed to get together and collectively draw a thick red line in the sand and say, hey, we're not going to use violence on peaceful people. We're not going to uh, um, raise revenue on our friends and neighbors, and we're not going to force these lockdowns that are bankrupting local businesses. Um, and so you could tell that they kind of like the idea. And so we began building a website, and we began, trying to explain to them that if you were going to draw a thick red line in the sand, and almost all police officers say they have a thick red line in the sand, like we're not going to confiscate guns, or it's just different places for different people. And we've been explaining that if you're going to do that, the logical and the moral place is natural law, and it's no victim, no crime. And that, if the police just went to protecting life, liberty, and property, well, then everybody loves the police. And it's only really when they're enforcing victimless crimes or lockdowns or mask mandates or red flag laws or raising revenue through taxation through citation that causes the racial and societal, uh, you know, um, division that is, where the police are under fire in all these cities. And so Black Lives Matter wants to defund the police. And while we, completely sympathize with their frustration with police abuse, We think this is a much better solution that not just fixes the problem of selective enforcement of victimless crimes in minority communities, or the problems associated with raising revenue on the population by through these outrageous citations and fines for victimless crimes, but this restores respect to the police. And so we want the so it's really up to the police to say no, but we want to support them as a community and want to say, hey, politicians, it's the people and the police together telling you no more victimless crimes, no more raising revenue, taxation through citation. And we think if the people and the police are united, then there's nothing that the politicians can do, and all this tyranny just kind of ends, and nobody would have to fear the police anymore. And so that's kind of what we're all about. That's how we got started, and we're supporting the police to say no to politicians on lockdowns and victimless crimes.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and thank you for that introduction to what the project's all about. I think it's cool that it was inspired by you guys doing some COVID activism, and I've been following you and old David Rodriguez, who's quite the extremist these days with his activism. You guys are really doing some good work over there. So let me ask you this, just to get things out of the way. What exactly do you mean when you say victimless crime? Can you give us some examples of a victimless crime? And then, of course, can you compare that to what a crime that has a victim is?
Yeah, sure. So the government forces everybody to go to their mandatory schools, and they teach the kids that whatever they write down on paper, whatever the politicians write down on a fancy piece of paper is law. And then if you break that law, then you owe the government money, or you've got to go into a government cage, or something like that. And obviously not all of those laws are moral. Just because a politician writes something down on a piece of paper doesn't mean that it's moral or it's the word of God or anything like that. And so a lot of the laws that politicians make and continue to make every day, they're churning out new laws. A lot of these laws are immoral and tyrannical on their face, and you obviously can't use the fact that a politician wrote it down on a piece of paper as a yardstick for morality, or you get fugitive slave laws, and you get Jim Crow laws, and you get Nazi Germany. And so what we're doing is we're educating the police on something called natural law. And in natural law, there's kind of five main transgressions. There's murder, robbery, rape, assault, and trespass, and all of these have a obvious victim because somebody has been harmed, and so those are obviously wrongs. And when you hear people say, "I have a right to this" or "I have a right to that," well, a right is anything that's not a wrong. And so when the police and the politician when the politicians pass laws that have victimless crimes, and that victimless crime can be anything from a seatbelt law to talking on your cell phone while you're driving, to um, smoking cannabis, to using CBD products or using natural supplements that some people don't like. Some politician, in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry doesn't like. And so when the government makes these, it says, hey, it's against the law to do something where there's no victim, they make the police the victim, because now the police are using violence on peaceful people. And so what we're doing is we're educating the police on what victimless crimes are, and we're educating them as to, if there's not really a victim, it's not really a crime. And then the same way the sheriff has discretion, wave his hand and say, hey, we're not going to enforce certain classes of victimless crimes, and they do it all the time. The individual police officers have the ability to get together, lock arms as a department, and say, we're no longer going to enforce these either. And so we want to give the just and they've had this discretion, but we want to just codify it for them.
Okay. So there's a few things that are coming up, and we do have some comments too. So I'm going to read this comment here, and then I'm going to kind of clarify the question that I would like to ask you. Please ask him about the big one he's skipping: death by cop in the homes and streets, the different use of force applied to people of color. Now, let me ask you this. I'm with you on abandoning the victimless crime, and that's even like an old common law type thing that you can try to bring up in court. Oftentimes the judges won't hear it. But one of the problems is, what about when there's actually a crime taking place, right? I want to know what the thick red line strategy would do to accommodate this. So let's say, I think his name was Eric Garner, the guy that got choked out in New York City. He apparently, well, I guess there's no victim really whenever you're selling the Lucy cigarettes. Let's say George Floyd. He apparently was trying to use a fake $20 bill or whatever, right? Or a hypothetical example, there is someone that does break the law. They do take from someone, they do hurt someone. And then law enforcement comes in and is overly brutal. And I know that I don't like the collectivist thing where like all cops are a certain way, right? Or all minorities are a certain way, which some people falsely believe. I do know that there's good cops out there that are decently good human beings, right? I've had relationships with law enforcement folks that were speaking our language when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to voluntariness and all this stuff. But I also know that the institution has a tendency to attract some very unsavory characters, and there are some people that are genuinely not the best human beings that like to use that official office, that authority that they get in order to hurt people. And there are some racists in law enforcement, and racists in law enforcement have more power to harm people than just your good old boys in Southern Alabama or whatever. No offense to folks in Alabama, but what do you say to that? Because it sounds like we could have an environment where the victimless crimes are eliminated, but there's still racist cops that are taking advantage of the opportunity to beat up on black folks. What do you say to that? Or white folks or whomever, but there is a tendency for people of color. It seems like they get it a little worse. What do you say to that?
No, they absolutely get it worse, and that's one of the problems that we identify in the handbook. And in our initial video, we actually showed the statistics of the discrepancy between the amount of people of color that are disproportionately targeted by the police for enforcement of mostly these victimless crimes. And so, if you do have racist police officers, then they love victimless crimes because the victimless crime gives them the opportunity to root around in somebody's car and search their car and try and find something that the government says is illegal. And there's a gazillion different things that the government says is illegal, all of the victims' crimes. And so if they can find you without a prescription, with someone else's prescription in your car, they can find, you with cannabis in your car, they can find you with something where they get to charge you money. Well, that is for racists, that's like a field day.
Yeah.
And so if you get rid of the victimless crimes and you say, we hope that ultimately one day, is your sheriff's department red lined? Are they a thick red line department? Well, that's a badge of honor because they're not pretending that they don't have rights that you do, and they're not trying. They're saying, hey, we're not going to enforce things that aren't really crimes. And so we want it to be a badge of honor that you can trust all of the people in the department. It's a lot harder for a racist cop to be a racist against somebody of color if the only thing that they can arrest them for is a real crime with a real victim. Because it
Okay.
can still happen, but you've got to manufacture a victim. You've got to have somebody that's willing to lie and say that Bob, stole something from my garage and have the scorn of the community on Bob, on the person making the accusation. Versus what happens now is, under victimless crimes, all it takes is a racist cop throws, a gun in somebody's car or a baggie of cocaine or paraphernalia or something like that, and now they can arrest them. They can make it a felony. And so
Yeah.
it really is. It's a horrible, horrible situation, for people of color to live in fear of race police officers, getting the opportunity to throw them in jail for a felony. And so I think people of color would feel much, much safer under a department that was thick red line and saying, "Hey, we're not going to be doing that to you. We're good people. We're not
Yeah.
going. We wouldn't do that to we wouldn't do that to you." So.
Okay, I understand. I think part of what I was getting at was that there are some times when there is a victim, like they steal $100 from someone's wallet, and then the police take the opportunity to be a little more aggressive. That phenomenon could still take place, but you're making the point that it would be dramatically limited if the cops had to focus on crimes with the victim. First of all, they wouldn't have all the time to go lollygag and harass the black youth walking down the street at night, right? They'd be focused on detective work and actual policing. And there is an incidence where, the young white preppy kid in the rich part of town that's smoking cannabis out by the park oftentimes will get overlooked or a slap on the hand. But the black poor kid in the other part of town, the low income part of town, or the Mexican or the white poor kid in a marginalized community, they're the ones that get roughed up. And so you take away the victimless crime and it minimizes those opportunities, it sounds like. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so there would be a lot less of the police trolling around, trying to arrest somebody, trying to raise revenue on them if they didn't have the opportunity to do that.
Okay, cool. I want to get into some perspectives, like because that was someone, Marion, that posted that, and it sounds like Marion is someone that's concerned with the police brutality against people of color. I want to ask you some questions from like a hardcore anarchist voluntarist, because there's a lot of purists out there that would see this as like working with the enemy essentially. And then strategically, I'd like to talk with you too, because I've done some police accountability work, and there's going to be resistance because a lot of these police departments, they like enforcing victimless crimes because it gives them a reason to have a bigger budget. It gives them a reason to exist. But before we get to that, why don't we watch this video? I watched it the other day that you have on the website. It's pretty well put together and polished, and I got to say, you deliver it pretty smoothly the way that you share this introduction. So let's go ahead and watch this video here for the viewing and listening audience to kind of get a nice overview of what the project's all about. Here we go.
American cities are on fire. There's rioting, looting, and police officers are being shot in the streets. Black Lives Matter is encouraging cities and towns to defund the police. And while we share BLM's frustration with police abuses, we're excited to share with them that there is a much better solution. What if there was a single, simple change to policing that would end the racial and societal division in our cities, end forced lockdowns and mask mandates, break the backs of drug cartels and pimps, save taxpayers billions of dollars, and focus the police on real crimes with real victims? That simple change is ending enforcement of victimless crimes, and it can be done by the local sheriff, town councils, or the police officers themselves by getting together collectively and refusing to go along. The biggest problem with policing isn't the police. It's politicians and bureaucrats that use legislation and executive orders, forcing the police to raise revenue on their friends and neighbors, arrest peaceful people for victimless crimes, or steal money, vehicles, and property using civil asset forfeiture. When police are busting murderers, rapists, and thieves, and everybody loves the police, it is the enforcement of victimless crimes and raising revenue on the population that is causing racial and societal division. In those policies, and the violence stops, and people will once again respect the police. I know from personally speaking with dozens of police officers and deputies that they don't want to be enforcing lockdowns that are bankrupting local businesses or raising revenue on their friends and neighbors. But they feel trapped by the prospect of losing their jobs and their pensions. And now the politicians are trying to force them to commit even more tyrannical acts, instituting stealth gun confiscation under the guise of red flag laws, and now openly discussing using the police for mandatory vaccinations. Myself and some friends decided to do something about it. My name is Howard Lichtman, and I'm the co-founder of the Thick Red Line Project. And we are helping sheriffs, police chiefs, deputies, and officers to say no to the politicians who would have them use violence and fines, which is simply extortion under the color of law, on peaceful people. We're helping them organize collectively and draw a thick red line in the sand. If they're united as an agency and supported by the community, then there is no way that politicians can force them to do anything. We're asking our friends, colleagues, elected representatives, and everyone who wants to see the violence stop to help. We're raising $10,000 to get the project off the ground, and the money will allow us to print hard copies of a handbook that we created to help sheriffs, police chiefs, deputies, and officers organize their agencies. We want to mail copies to elected officials, journalists, community leaders, and citizen activists in cities that are being pressed to defund their departments so that they know there is a better way that ends the violence without throwing those cities and towns into turmoil. If you want to help, then we have hard copies of our handbook and cards for cops to help you support your local sheriff and local police department. If you can help in a big way, then we can organize a mailing and calling campaign that can get information into the hands of your local sheriff, police chief, elected officials, journalists, television and newspapers, community leaders, and community activists. Together, we can stop the violence, end the lockdowns, keep hundreds of thousands of people out of for-profit prisons, save the taxpayers billions, break the backs of drug cartels and pimps, end 60,000 SWAT team raids a year, and most importantly, restore respect for the police and get them focused on real crimes with real victims.
We're gonna stop it right there. Okay, so let me so we're live on D Live. I want to thank everyone that's tuning into the live stream, and especially thanks to folks on D Live. We're streaming on Facebook and YouTube on multiple different channels, but the folks on D Live are the ones that are still going to be able to see us when we inevitably get censored by big tech. And D Live is kind of cranking out some thoughts. Let me show that here. Some of the D Live are probably some more of the extreme radicals over here. So they were excited to hear about asking about an anarchist point of view. The order followers are the reason that the Tyranovs forward on. They're the revenue generators for the state. There was some pushback earlier in the conversation. So let's go ahead and hit that, because you can hit this from multiple different perspectives. I like to consider myself a philosophical anarchist and, pretty big purist when it comes to this stuff. So the whole concept of restoring respect for the police, and earlier you said that their function was supposed to protect life, liberty, and property, right? I've never known government to actually protect life, liberty, and property. And in fact, government has historically done the exact opposite. They've been the biggest aggressors against life, liberty, and property. So what do you say strategic? I know a lot of this is about strategy, right? Like a return to a minarchist constitutional government would certainly be preferable to this nasty empire, intrusive federal government we have, right? Just the same, in an ideal anarchist world, there are no municipal monopolistic police. There's private defense, there's civil defense, there's Dale Brown. Somebody asked about Dale Brown's Threat Management Center in Detroit. We'll talk about that. So how do you respond to that? Because I know that you're a voluntarist, and some other voluntarists are probably a little irking and feeling a little uneasy about the approach that you're taking. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so 100% I'm a voluntarist. I don't believe that government is legitimate, desirable, or necessary. But what I'm doing is I'm working within the system that we have now to give the people that are trapped in it through this flawed, designed bad incentive system. I'm trying to give them a way out that is good for both the enforcers and for the communities that right now that's their only form of armed police response. And so in the book, we talk outright in the handbook, we discuss the privatization of police services, and we're looking for innovative police chiefs and innovative sheriffs that are interested in privatizing their departments. But in the meantime, the main thing I'm concerned is, how do you end the violence in the cities and the racial and societal division and achieve the greatest good for the greatest number without using any force on anybody else. And so I look at this as a way of getting us in a huge step towards a voluntary future and a voluntary world, in something that can be achieved today within the existing paradigm, that is good for the community and is good for the police. And so, I don't see any negatives. I'm not hiding the fact that I'm a voluntarist. I'm trying to educate people as to the market mechanisms where the police can be privatized. And because they are privatized and they have to compete with West Tech and Brinks, AT, that they produce better service focused on restitution and versus retribution, and that they're not out raising, they have no ability to raise, for them to be forced by politicians to raise revenue on their friends and neighbors. And so yeah, I'm 100% with you. I just, this is the step that gets us 80-90% of our shared goal, that can be accomplished within the existing framework of the mandatory government police.
Right on. And I can appreciate that from a practical standpoint. Like I try to be idealistic in where it is that I would like to see society go, but I long ago accepted the fact that it's highly unlikely that, at least in our generation or my kids' generation or my grandkids, that we will accomplish a global stateless society, right? And so one of the things that I've tried to concern myself with is how can we strategically carve out an environment where we free people who no longer have use for government, who would much rather self-govern, how can we peacefully coexist with the existing state apparatus? And so I see this organization and this effort that you guys are putting together is kind of a step towards that, to help them to realize that, right? Because at the end of the day, if the cops are only messing with victim crimes that have victims, then a lot of people all of a sudden don't really even engage with the state so much. So let me ask you this. Obviously, you're targeting municipal police. Are there any efforts to reach out to the IRS, right? Because there's stuff like income tax that often doesn't get enforced. However, the federal agents, if they're actually going to go raid someone's house and take their property, they do ask the local sheriff's department to hop on board. Let me hear from you about how the other crimes, like not a direct crime that police investigate, but a crime like not paying your income tax, for example. And then I'd be curious to hear, are you guys targeting sheriffs as well? Because they're a little different. Could you share with us some of the differences between a corporate municipal police department and a constitutional county sheriff department, and how that structure, that legal change affects the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so the sheriff really is the linchpin here, and because the sheriff is an elected official and has kind of broad public support and can't be fired except by the people. And so the sheriff can wave his hand and say, we're not, as a department, going to do victimless crimes. And they do it all the time. So we're actually starting with, there's a lot of really good sheriffs that have said no publicly to lockdowns, have said no publicly to mask mandates and Thanksgiving limitations and red flag laws. And so there's tons of sheriffs that are saying, we've already drawn a thick red line right here. What we're trying to do is just educate them, as to, take them a little bit further and say, really, if you're going to do it morally, if you're going to do it ethically, no victim, no crime, that's where you draw the line. That's what's going to give you the good karma. That's what's going to, reduce the violence in your particular city. And so we're starting with the sheriffs, the police chiefs in a municipal police department. The chief typically works at the pleasure of the city council, the town manager, the mayor, and they can also, they have wide discretion. They can wave their hand, but they can be overruled, by the, and I know from when we were doing civil disobedience in California that this was being pushed down on police chiefs from elected, from politicians. It wasn't, coming from the, law enforcement in a great many cases. And so sheriffs are kind of, we look at as the low hanging fruit. We're all going after police chiefs. There's plenty of good police chiefs that aren't willing to use violence on peaceful people. But it's the sheriffs we believe we have got the best shot at. And we think if they're supported by the people, then that's going to give them the cover to be able to make a drastic change like this. And then finally, you could also do it through elected representatives. And so one of our board of advisors member is a gentleman by the name of Dave Austin. He's a 5-time elected alderman in the city of Vergennes, Vermont, and he gave us a great quote. He said, that paraphrasing, I don't want our police wasting their time on victimless crimes. I want them focused on real crimes with real victims. And so, if you're an elected representative, if you're an alderman, if you're a board of supervisors member, they have the ability to tell the police department and the sheriff, hey, we don't want you to be raising revenue on our constituents. We don't want you. You're going to have to maybe, trim up the SWAT team and lose the drone, and maybe the Stingray Tower, and all the the other affronts to privacy that where it's kind of getting some in some cities and towns is getting out of control.
Right on. Okay. Have you guys reached out to Richard Mack? I showed the Constitutional Sheriff's Peace Officers Association. Richard Mack has done a lot of good work. For people not familiar, he was a sheriff in the 90s that pushed back on the Brady Bill, which was going to enforce on, air quotes, automatic weapons or assault rifles that they call them, right? And he was actually pretty successful. And then he turned it into a movement, essentially encouraging sheriffs to stand up for the rights of the people in their county and to disobey unjust laws. Have you guys reached out to him, or is there any opportunity for collaboration there? Because it sounds like you guys are speaking the same language.
Absolutely. And in fact, Sheriff Mack is on our board of advisors, and
Cool.
on the on our website at www.thickredline.org. In the video section, you can see an interview that Tim Pachote, the Liberty Advisor, did with Sheriff Mack and myself at the Red Pill Expo on Jekyll Island earlier this
Perfect.
year, where we talk about, victimless crimes, and where Sheriff Mack himself is railing against taxation through citation, talking about what a problem it is for law enforcement, where they're being leaned on to raise revenue on what are essentially their friends and neighbors for politicians to pay for these political problems. And so Sheriff Mack's against that as well. We're against that. This is a really, really big tent. And so, this is something that voluntarists and constitutionalists and liberals and conservatives, like everybody, can get together on ending victimless crimes for a variety of different, reasons. And that's what we're trying to build. Is we're trying to build, a huge, huge, huge tent where the entire community can get behind this, because it's producing so many benefits for so many different constituencies within the community, from saving the taxpayers money to ending ending racist cops' ability to frame with planted drugs or guns, or there's so many positive outcomes that I haven't really run into any serious criticism of the idea, why it couldn't work, why it wouldn't work. So we're excited that so many different aspects of people are on board with the Thick Red Line.
Yeah, I think probably the most resistance would come from police officer associations and perhaps private prison associations, right? Because you're going to be taking away some of their revenue. And I know that like the associations, the law enforcement associations, really have a tendency to be nasty and have a big influence on public policy. They're the ones that are always fighting to keep cannabis Schedule 1. They're the ones that are always fighting against decriminalizing this or lowering fines and the criminal penalties for all sorts of stuff. So that would definitely be one to watch out for. I have a lot of experience in the police accountability world. There were a few years where that was one of my primary focuses with the Peaceful Streets Project. I was the co-founder of that organization. We came together in defense of Antonio Beeler, who was wrongfully arrested, and then they put him on trumped up charges. It really started it and ignited a movement. And we used to go do these police abuse reports, or we call them the police abuse complaint department. That's what it was. Police abuse and complaint department. We'd sit out in front of the jail and we would interview people as they would come out, and we got all sorts of nasty stories. And we realized that like Antonio Beeler got it really bad, but there's a lot of folks that get it even worse. So we started this Peaceful Streets Project. Now I had a split with this gentleman. I didn't really even want to list his name, but it helps with the backstory. And the reason was because I have often taken a similar approach to you, even if it's someone that I see as a political adversary. I still like the approach where we try to have a civil conversation. try to reach people through connection rather than through vitriol and aggression. And the tone that was coming from some of the folks that were involved in that organization started turning into the all cops are bastards, pigs are scum. Whenever there would be a law enforcement officer that was killed in the line of duty, that it would kind of be celebrated like on the social media. And I was like, I came up with the name Peaceful Streets Project. This isn't that, right? This isn't what the original vision was. And throughout that time, I actually developed relationships with some police officers in Austin. Some of them were really of like mind. One of them was viewed as like there was a internal fusion center report that got leaked through the Blue Leaks hack, and it referenced him. It referenced me. They did one on me for some of my activism, pushing Peaceful Streets Project, and it said like, we know that he hangs out with this John Bush character and he's considered a conspiracy theorist within the ranks. But I thought that it was valuable to have some folks on the inside of the law enforcement to build relationships, to try to create more unity rather than so much division, because when there's division and there's hate, it only persists the problem. So what do you think about the importance of, in activism in general, trying to come at it from an approach of compassion and understanding rather than this division, angst, aggression towards one another? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I tell you, the only way to do it is with love. And, so everybody's got, or at least most people that I know have friends that are police officers or family members that are police officers. And most of those guys signed up. When they signed up, the police weren't doing red flag laws. They weren't doing lockdowns. They weren't doing all of this stuff that they're being asked and forced to do today. And so I look at a lot of the cops as being, good people that are trapped in a bad system. And so if they say no, we want to give them the ability to say no, and lock arms, draw a thick red line in the sand, and collectively refuse to enforce victimless crimes. And then that restores the respect to them, and then that ends them being forced to do these things that weren't asked of them. That wasn't in the job description when they signed up, for law enforcement. And then the other thing that I was going to tell you is I agree 100%, that we're all about the love, and we're all about, having, a good time and good relations with not just the police, but everybody. When we were doing civil disobedience in California that goes on today, we're doing events, where we were reopening the beaches, and we're having beach parties, and and there's kids, and there's people playing guitars, and there's music, and there's free hugs, and there's like everybody is having a good time. And so we want the police to come into that. We want the police to join us and, come get the free hug, come, to our beach parties, have a good time, because these laws that they're enforcing, they hurt them. They can't have a beach party. The police are under the same tyrannical rules that we're being forced under, and they're getting sick of it too. And, like they said, they like having beach parties too. They don't want to see their rights stolen. They don't want to see their rights stolen from their kids or their family members or whatever. And so this is really the tent that allows them to, to come in with the rest of the community, and for the community to support them. And so it's a really, really big tent.
Okay. Here, let's go to one of these questions. I referenced it earlier. This is Sourdough watching on YouTube. Thoughts on Detroit's Viper threat management with Dale Brown? Is he in line with the non-aggression principle? Any influence on the state? I know he works alongside them. What are your thoughts on Dale Brown's work?
So I've met Dale Brown, and we call out the Detroit Threat Management Center in the handbook that you can download for free at thickredline.org. But for those that are unfamiliar with Dale Brown and Detroit's Threat Management Center, that is a private police organization that provides police type services in the city of Detroit, serving neighborhoods that the police have either abandoned or that have such a long response time that might as well have abandoned it. And so what Dale Brown has done has kind of proven the business model that you can have privatized police services where the citizens of the city are customers, valued customers, and are treated like customers and treated with respect, instead of what you've got right now, where you've got a monopoly provider And a lot of the the monopoly providers employees think that they are above the citizenry that pays their that are forced to pay their salaries and are rude and nasty and and uh, host of other problems. So Dale Brown proved it can be done, and proved that the that you can treat your community like the customers that they are, and still achieve high positive outcomes.
Right on. Okay, let's talk about some of the deeper strategy of actually accomplishing some good with this project. Let me share some of the hurdles that come up in my head. How do you overcome the fact that there are a significant number of cops that are generally just like bullies, and they like the fact that they can have victimless crimes? And some of the, as you know, oftentimes there's this good old boy network and the thin blue line, right, which is a counter, the thin blue line. Real quick, before I finish the question, will you share your understanding of the thin blue line with the audience? What does that mean?
My understanding is that the police have a mentality that they are separating society from barbarism, and that they stand in between the good people of the world and the bad people of the world as a thin blue line. And if they only, and the problem is, if only is that would be the case if they only protected life, liberty, and property. But as we and we're not sugarcoating it, because there's no way to sugarcoat it when we're pointing out that when the police use violence on peaceful people, okay, to either raise revenue on their friends and neighbors or persecute people for crimes that have no victims, that they become the criminal in society, and that they're using violence, and that they're stealing money, and they're committing kidnapping, and they're committing extortion. And so that's what my understanding of the thin blue line is it saying that they're standing between civility and barbarity.
Okay. There's an element of it that I understand, that it's like a brotherhood, right? The thin blue line. And one of the tendencies within law enforcement is that they're going to get one another's back. And they're one of the reasons why we have a lot of problems in law enforcement is that whenever someone does step out of line, whenever someone goes against a policy, whenever someone is a little bit too aggressive or a whole lot too aggressive, more often than not, there's a tendency for the cops to get each other's back and to lie about reports, or for the supervisor to look the other way. And there's another phenomenon that takes place where the cops that play ball and they don't rat out their buddies, they have a tendency to work their way up their ranks. And again, I'm not speaking in absolutes, but this is definitely something that takes place. So I trust that you agree that that takes place. And how do you think this project can help to overcome that? Because I see that being a big hurdle. There genuinely are some bad apples in there. And oftentimes the bad apples are the ones that become the lieutenants and the police chiefs. So how do you guys hope to overcome that?
So yeah, 100% I agree that so my thesis is that the majority of people that enter law enforcement did it for the right reasons, and they're good people trapped in a bad system. But I 100% acknowledge the reality that there are bad cops, and they're bad sheriffs, and they're bad chiefs, and some of them are even profiting off of the drug war, whether it's that
They're
they're
corrupt. Yeah, some of them are
using,
taking
yeah,
bribes and stuff too.
they're taking bribes, or they're selling stuff that they confiscate from one gang out on the street. They've been caught, all police departments all over the country have been caught selling stuff out of the evidence room, and busting rival gangs, and transporting drugs for cartels, and just a whole host of things that are prohibition related. And so a lot of this violence and a lot of this criminality is prohibition related. And so there are, without a doubt, there are dirty sheriffs and dirty police chiefs that are profiting from drugs being illegal, and from there being prohibition, and from having to incarcerate lots of people. If you search engine the phrase sheriff and jail food scam, a lot of sheriffs, they get to keep a certain percentage of the jail food budget, and so that
Wow.
they end up feeding the inmates nothing but white cheese, white bread and bologna sandwiches 3 meals a day, so that they can pocket the difference. And there have been tons of sheriffs that have been caught doing that, and so I'm acknowledging that that's a real issue. And so the thick red line is one way that you can tell, do I have a good sheriff or do I have a corrupt sheriff? It's not, the main denominator, but like, if your sheriff is engaged in making money off of civil asset forfeiture, or drug prohibition, then of course he's going to not be for that going away so he can keep making money. And so the way that you got to one way that you should be able to know that you have a good sheriff is that they're willing to say no victim, no crime, and they're not willing to prosecute drug war. And so, I look at it hopefully as being a kind of badge of honor, and for people to say, hey, I want to live in a county that is a thick red line county. I don't want to live somewhere where I can be preyed upon, or extorted at gunpoint, or under threat of fines and fees, and everything that the government throws at peaceful people that are just trying to lead their lives, and aren't harming anybody. And so hopefully that's the way of separating the good from the bad.
Right on. Another difficulty I see y'all facing potentially is, this. I think that this idea is going to be more successful in smaller communities, right? Where a
Mhm.
smaller town, smaller city, smaller county, where everyone knows one another. The sheriff grew up with the business owners, and everyone's kids played ball together, so on and so forth. A lot of these big cities, the law enforcement live in outlier cities. They don't even live there and mix it up with the citizens. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on overcoming that. And then unfortunately, one phenomenon that we have with bureaucracy is like, whenever they get a budget, they want to maintain that budget, and they try to seek to have projects and efforts in order to create a supposed need whenever the lawmakers or the budget gets created, right? And so
Mhm.
I do see in some big cities, some people, they won't want to give up victimless crimes because then it means they have to give away all their toys and stuff. So what's the strategy to overcome that? And like, is it like we need to have a critical mass? We need to have people making phone calls. We need to be building relationships. The same thing with a lot of city governments. I guess now with the defund the police effort, that plays into it. I mean, are you guys in favor of defunding the police or shifting the budget, it seems, towards the victim crime, stuff like that? Can you address that?
I mean, all of those are individual cities. Like, what is the strategy? Depends on what the city is. What are they doing right now? Are they already enforcement? I mean, there's so many different variables. That's why I like thick red line in the sense that it's a really simple change. Like anybody can understand it. You don't really even have to retrain the police. Like, hey, cops, it's not a victim, it's not a crime.
Yeah.
Just stop just stop. If there's not a victim, there's not a crime. And then boom, that one simple change. Look, that's the whole training. We just did a whole training for the police on how not to get the town mad at you. No victim, no crime. Anybody can do it, and then it helps in so many different other places. With respect to where the police live, yeah, this is one of the reasons why I think that policing has got tyrannical. Is that a lot of times we're bussing people in from out of town that don't know their neighbors and don't care about whether or not they're acting tyrannical or raising revenue, or any of the other abuses that the police regularly engage in. And so I think that if the police had to live in the town that they're enforcing these on, and everybody knew the police officer's kid, and they went to the same school, that it wouldn't happen.
Hmm.
And I'm just one final question, and then I got to hop at 1 o'clock. I apologize, but I was talking to one of thick red line community ambassadors the other night, and that's what we call it, community ambassadors. Is the strategy is really we're looking for people that have the gravitas to organize their own community, and that can go and talk to the media, can go talk to the mayor, can go talk to the police chief, can go talk to the sheriff, and that ideally already has connections in there, and say, hey, this is good for you, this is good for the
Hmm.
community, and this is really what shut down lockdowns and shut down the red flag laws and shut down everything and get their own local department on board. And so I was talking to, one of our community ambassadors in Oregon the other day, and he was telling me that, their school was under a forced, something that the school was being threatened, but because the sheriff's son went to the school and his child went to the school, that the sheriff said, "Hey, don't worry about it. We're not enforcing that."
Nice.
And so that's what happens when the sheriff lives in the community, is that he's not going to, have his family suffer and his neighbors suffer and the friends that he has on the school board
Yeah.
suffer. And so I think that that's really, really handy. And that's the kind of sheriffs we want to work with. We want to work with people
Yeah.
that want to be part of the community, that, that want to be, pillars of respectability, and not
They're out
where
there.
people are worried about them, raising revenue on their neighbors.
Sure. Okay, before I let you go, share with the audience how they can support this project. I know that this is the pamphlet. You guys are trying to get some materials put together. It looks like you'll have a fundraiser that you're doing that's actually doing pretty good. You got over $10,000 raised. So can you share how people can get involved as far as activism, and then how their financial contributions could help your project?
Yeah, so we're in the middle of a GoFundMe. We hit our initial goal of 10,000. We had a $20,000
Nice.
stretch goal from the beginning, and we're going to kind of announce that in a week or two. But people can support us through the GoFundMe. They can support us at the site. Today, we're mailing out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of copies of our handbook for the police, and thousands of our cards for cops that explain the police the basics. But that's some way that you can hand. And every 2 weeks, we've got a call where we do trainings for community ambassadors, where we explain to them how they can get involved and how they can organize their own communities. And so those are some ways that we'd like to see people involved. Final thing is that, because I know you've got an international audience. We're spreading internationally. We've chartered our first international chapter in the Netherlands. And so
Cool.
we're in the process of having that translated into Dutch. We're having a handbook translated into Spanish. And we think this is a global movement. It's a global problem. And
Yep.
so even if you're not in the United States, you can organize your own country. You can organize, we're looking for the kind of people that can, organize an entire country and stop an amazing amount of violence, and heal societal division.
Right on. Cool. Hey, well, I want to thank you for coming on the program. The website is thickredline.org, thickredline.org. You can contribute financially. You can become an ambassador. Go to the site to see all the social media and to join the 2-week, every 2 weeks they do this conference call to get tuned in. Thank you so much, Howard. You keep up the good work, man. This is a great project y'all got going here.
Hey, you too, John. Thanks for all you do. And thank you guys for listening.
Right on. All right. We'll talk to you later. Keep it up. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for tuning in to the Live Free Now show, bringing you the news, views, tips, and tools you can use to live a free, prosperous, and healthy life. Today, we chatted with Howard Lichtman about the Thick Red Line project. I think there's a lot of promise. I think, it's not going to be easy, but that which we attain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly, as Thomas Paine said. So again, check out the website at thickredline.org, thickredline.org. This has been John Bush on the Live Free Now show. Peace. I'm out. Thanks.